Welcome, everybody. Tom Glucci here, Senior Vice President of Business Development with the Mortgage Collaborative, and excited to bring you the latest and third installment of an eMortgage-centric podcast series that we've been collaborating on with our friends over at Fannie Mae going back to the fourth quarter of 2020, where previously we tapped on eMortgage expert Mike Cafferkey to talk through some common FAQs as they relate to going down your eMortgage journey. Had a second great session with Becca Perkovic, as well as Michael Jones with Thrive Mortgage, talking about the user experience on the lender side and helpful tips towards really advancing your eMortgage adoption. And happy to bring you the third part of this podcast series installment today, where we take a deeper dive with some key technology service providers who support the digital mortgage ecosystem and offer eClose capabilities. So I'm privileged to have some esteemed guests and fellow friends of the network here with us today. But before I introduce our guests for this discussion, I want to lay out really quickly some of the objectives for today. First and foremost, we want to help you gain a deeper understanding for the lenders out there of eMortgage with a focus on learning about these technology service providers and what they can offer on an eClose solution and other digital mortgage capabilities, as well as sharing insights and considerations for how the technology service provider selection helps meet lenders' business goals and shared objectives, as well as sharing perspectives on how your organization views eMortgage readiness and what you believe it takes to be successfully implemented today. So as we dive in here, first off, from Fannie Mae, we have Director of eMortgage Strategy and Operations, Shane Hartzler. How's it going, Shane?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Tom?
Oh, I'm wonderful. Always great to have you on these discussions.
Glad to be back.
And so also joining us from TMC Preferred Partner Blend, we have Product Lead Gaurav Nagla. Hey, Gaurav.
Hey, Tom. How are
Thanks
you?
for joining us today. I'm well.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And then we also have Product Manager from our partner at Simplenexuss, Shane Westrap. How you doing, Shane?
Very well. Pleasure to be here.
We're kind of starting things off. I want to bring Shane Hartzler back in. I want to help provide our attendees some initial context, for this discussion as it relates to industry challenges and really what our industry can do better to help fully support a digital mortgage ecosystem. So really the first question I have for you, Shane, is, you often speak to lenders, and when they prepare for eMortgage readiness, what do you believe are some of the core challenges they face today as they're pursuing, their eMortgage roadmap or looking to ramp up their eMortgage adoption?
Yeah, and I'm gonna present this both in terms of discussing this as a challenge, but also maybe as sort of a best practice or a way that we think about addressing that challenge, right? So the first thing that I always think that's critical to any of this is education and adoption, and this is based on we went back and did some feedback with 7 or 8 of our customers who had recently come on and had begun doing eMortgage, including a couple of TMC customers as well. And one of the things that we heard from them was the importance of education and adoption. And by that, I think what's really important there is that you're doing that for everyone that's involved, right? So this is a different way of operating, and so you really need to make sure that you're communicating with all sort of stakeholders. So by that I mean your internal operations team. I mean that by the loan officers need to understand sort of what's being different and what that's going to look like. You need to be talking to all of your external stakeholders, right? So your settlement companies, your warehouse banks. If you depending on what you're doing with servicing, you're doing that. And then the last sort of key component of the education and adoption is borrowers. This is a huge borrower benefit. I'm sure we're going to be able to hear from Shane and Gaurav later on today in terms of some of the benefits that they see from their technologies. But you need to make sure that the borrower understands what some of those capabilities are, but also just as important that they understand sort of how they're going to interact with the technology and sort of what that's going to look like, because this is very different from maybe how they've done closing traditionally. Now, again, the good news is if you're using a technology provider like Blend or Simplenexuss, hopefully they've already been using some of that technology, and so they're accustomed to some of that. And again, I think that's some of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later on. The second thing that I sort of recommend as both a challenge or a way to get around some of the challenges is make sure you have executive sponsorship, right? There needs to be someone that's sort of guiding this within the organization, and that when challenges come up, right, because there are going to be challenges, this is all about change management, that there's somebody there who can help to sort of push those things through. The third thing that I like to highlight is think about processes and controls. This is a different way of doing things. And so you need to think about, well, what are we going to do when we're going to do an eMortgage and then at the last minute we have to paper out, right? So make sure your technology has those capabilities, has those processes and controls to manage a lot of those things. And then the last thing that I like to say, I'm sure this has probably come up in some of the other conversations you had maybe with Mike and Rebecca, is really think, and this is a change that I've had in some of my focus over the last 6 to 12 months. This has really been something that, as a result of COVID, I've started talking to lenders a lot more about, is really think about having capabilities in place to sign an e-note. And the reason why I say that is, particularly as we think about a COVID closing, right? So a non-face-to-face sort of interaction. Settlement agents are going to be able to come up with a lot of unique, solutions to be able to solve for a lot of the documents that are in the closing package and helping to get those closed in a remote sort of fashion. But the only thing that they can't really do, particularly if you wanted to do it electronically, is the note. The note, again, there's special requirements around it. There's special technology capabilities. And so I'm really recommending to all of our lender customers is start thinking about that, start putting those processes in place. And a lot of times that's going to be the long pole. But if you have those capabilities, you're going to be farther along. Again, I think the good news is part of the conversation with the technology partners that we're talking today. They're thinking about that, and they're going through and thinking about some of that e-note integration. And so, in a lot of cases, that's already going to be taken care of for you. But that's an important piece of that. And then finally, the last thing, just as we think about sort of challenges, is, and I say this, I'm going to say this again as good news also, is if you're an organization who's already taken steps towards digital transformation, so if you have upfront point of sale capabilities, if you've been already looking at some of your data validation services, if you've been thinking about how do I create, APIs or other sort of mechanisms by which I can exchange data between some of my external parties, the more that you've been thinking about that, the more that the implementation on the e-closing side is going to become a lot easier, right? Because you've already been thinking about what's a lot of those things are going to look like. So those are some of the things that I think about as I think about both challenges and opportunities.
Excellent, Shane. And first off, kudos to you and your team. I think from my experience personally, Fannie Mae does a fantastic job in helping, coach the lender clients of yours through the process, and the eMortgage Readiness Checklist that Fannie Mae provides really helps kind of serve that timeline and the different boxes that need to be checked off to make sure that you've got the appropriate infrastructure in place to be able to truly adopt an e-process. And I know we've had past discussions on this, but I think COVID has really amplified the value or the importance of being aligned with your settlement service providers that you're leveraging as far as the adoption goes, and making sure that they're in a position to be able to fully accept an eMortgage as far as the whole internal adoption process goes.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. So it kind of leads me to my next question for you, because it's, the checklist, I think, is an area where Fannie Mae has done an outstanding job in helping guide the industry as a whole. But I love your perspective on where you think the industry could be doing better to support the digital mortgage ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think there's two or three things that I would highlight here to that, and it's a really important thing. It's something certainly that we're looking at, right? Like as we look at the industry, as we continue to sort of say, what are the things that we can do to help guide? So the first thing is, I think we need to continue. We mentioned the settlement providers. I keep talking about the settlement providers, and I want to say that I don't think it's necessarily because they're not ready. I think actually in a lot of cases they are, but we know that that's really where still a lot of the challenges lie. And it's not necessarily even because they're not ready, but it's because of what I'm going to talk about, which is you need this ability to sort of communicate and collaborate between the lenders and the settlement providers. And I think we as an industry need to keep thinking about ways to help facilitate those communications and those collaborations more, right? So, if I think about, traditionally in a paper-based closing, like I gave my closing instructions, but there was no sort of question around how that closing was going to get done. And now there's there's all these questions around, is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be RON? Am I going to do, in-person electronic notarization? Am I going to do, this audio visual sort of RIN where I'm still going to be, it's going to be a paper signing, but I'm going to facilitate it through this audio visual sort of mechanism, right? Like, because there's all of these variations and flavors on how the closing can get done now, and there's different technology platforms and ways to do that, I think it's really important that as an industry, we keep thinking about how do we share information between the lender and the settlement providers, and we make it so that that interaction can happen a lot more seamlessly. So that's one of the first things I see. I think the second thing is, I think we still need to keep thinking about how we leverage technology as part of the closing process and to help facilitate that. I think some of what we've seen from the states in terms of what they're doing with RIN, and again, when I say RIN, I mean it's a traditional paper-based closing, right? But I'm leveraging audio-visual technology. And I think one of the things that I think about that is, like, it's great that we're using that technology. I understand where the states were going and the reason why we needed to do that. But if we're going to leverage the technology, let's think about how we really use the technology, not just to sort of facilitate this face-to-face, but let's think about what we do in terms of fraud prevention, as we think about borrower authentication, as we think about security protocols, right? Like, let's really use the technology so that we can make the process better and not just, sort of, pave over the cow path and just use technology to facilitate something that's a traditional way of doing it, right? Like, we have opportunities. Let's look to really take advantage of those opportunities. And then the last thing that I would say is, and I've been saying this for a long time, is we need to keep thinking end to end. So we need to keep thinking, like, we think very sort of linearly and very stovepiped in the way we think. And this is, again, I want to highlight, this is one of the benefits of the companies like Blend and Simplenexuss, because they've already been starting to help us, sort of move away from these stovepipes and start thinking, holistically about what the process looks like. So we're doing that on the origination side right now. So we're thinking about, point of sale and data validation and closing, and we're all about that. So the next thing that we need to start doing is now start thinking holistically as we go into servicing, and as we start thinking about a purchase transaction and servicing, and then loss mitigation and refinance, and start thinking a lot more of it sort of cyclically versus linearly, and eliminate a lot of these stovepipes and start, once we capture data and we have that data, let's start thinking about how do I leverage that across, rather than I use it for a little bit and then I push it away and I ask for the data again. So those are the things that I think that we can do as an industry to help sort of support this and keep moving the digital mortgage ecosystem forward.
No, and it's such great points, Shane. You're right. It's how we tend to think about the manufacturing process applied towards technology, as opposed to taking more of a linear focus out on the different components that, to your point, the data aggregation, the end-to-end solutions can really encompass when we start thinking more broadly about how you effectively leverage technology, as well as from a security standpoint, as you're relating to kind of a RIN transaction as well. So those are great points that are often understated. which is a perfect segue to bringing in Gaurav and Shane here as we talk about two solution providers from within the industry that are really putting together an end-to-end focus on the origination process. And so, Gaurav, I want to start with you here. How do you view innovation, and twofold beyond that, what made you decide, I guess as an organization with Blend, to move forward with an eClose solution?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think that's an important question. For us, the innovation, whether we are talking about eClose or any product that we're building at Blend, one thing that we have fundamental for us is we want to create not an incremental better experience, but like a 10x better experience when we are designing a product for our customers, and whether we talk about borrowers, lenders, or other parties who are involved or participating in that transaction. And that is really important to us because we firmly believe if we create that better experience, it's gonna make life easier and also provide much cheaper transactions for everybody in the ecosystem. And that's how we look at innovation. And when we're designing the product, it's very important to keep into mind that we should not be building a product where now you need FAQs or how-to guides. It should be so intuitive that I just log into and I can understand on my own how to take different actions and utilize it. So when we thought about eClose for us is a natural extension of mortgage product. Because when you think about a truly digital mortgage, it means starting the mortgage journey early on to signing the closing package. And we are already doing that with our POS, where you can apply for the mortgage, you can get approvals, you can interact with the LOs and lenders throughout the process. You can even receive and sign disclosures on the platform. So now to allow the borrower that continuum of experience so they can sign the closings at their home or wherever they are in the country at that point of time, or even outside the country, it's a natural extension for us. And we always wanted to build that and complete the true digital mortgage experience. So we started working on this early in the last year, but obviously COVID came in. So we fast tracked that thing and announced the availability for, later half of the 2020.
It's fantastic. And you're right. It's amazing how just through the impacts, obviously unfortunate impacts of COVID for us as a mortgage industry really forced the needle to be pushed forward just through the realities of how do you get a loan closed in a remote setting, towards pushing that needle forward on, not only eClose innovation, but also adoption from the lender side. So it's great points. And I think we're all grateful that, from a Blend standpoint, that process has been expedited over the past year. And a great segue, I want to bring back in Shane Westra here from Simplenexuss and pose that same question out to you personally. How do you view innovation, and what kind of, from your perspective, made Simplenexuss move forward, with your eClose solution?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. For us, we've always had a relentless focus on the users and just trying to idolize and figure out what is the most perfect solution for each persona. And for us, we've actually split the teams up that way. And so we've got a team focused on the borrower experience, the loan officer experience, et cetera. And that way, it's easy to craft, kind of storyboard out, hey, imagine that all the constraints are done away. What if there were no regulations, no anything preventing us from just having the most perfect solution? And you draw that out. And then, if there are regulations or things that you need to put some constraints back in, you're at least starting from a much better vantage point. And you think of things much differently than you would otherwise do. And also, I really like the comment that Shane Hartzler made that these technologies, they can be used to solve multiple problems at once. Quite often, the same technology that is used to improve ease of use for a borrower are the same things that's going to prevent risk scenarios. And so you can reduce the risk at the same time, you can improve efficiencies. And so you have this multiplying effect where one little change can really have a huge positive impact for everyone involved. And for us, similar to what Gaurav mentioned, I remember preparing for our user conference last year and realizing, oh, there's this virus. And just kind of playing out the scenarios. Okay, if this comes to the US, what's the impact? And we were able to do kind of a similar thing, rearrange our priorities, because we had eClose on the roadmap already, but a little bit further out. Rearrange things to get this out as quickly as possible. And it was amazing what focus that brought and how quickly we could get this to market, and how open the lenders were to those options. And it was great to see that come together so quickly, and especially for everyone to realize that this is just not a problem due to the pandemic, that these are really the same, it's the same direction that everyone should go anyway. And so it's really just kind of an acceleration of these best practices. People quickly realize that, yeah, there's really no loss here. It's easier to use for the borrower. The efficiency gains are off the charts, much more secure. And in fact, having a lot of these conversations with the lenders, a lot of them kind of took a step back and realized that, wow, what we're doing just makes no sense. Yeah, how come we didn't jump on this earlier? So I think it was a good opportunity as to really reevaluate how things should be going forward, and not just get used to doing things the way they've always been done.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it deserves credence in applauding the industry as a whole, from the lenders to Fannie Mae and the agencies, as well as really innovative providers like both Blend and Simplenexuss. How remarkably, for everything that we were facing as a country, and then the onslaught of sheer volume, this industry didn't miss a beat and played a huge role in continuing to support the overall economy here, really, in the States through the housing finance. So, everybody's worked so tirelessly this year. I think it's worth mentioning and giving a round of kudos out to our industry as a whole for staying laser focused on, leveraging this opportunity to really push forward technology that's been here at our doorstep for a while, and needed the push for which to do so. Gaurav, I want to circle back to you kind of with this similar question. You touched upon it a little bit at the tail end of your prior response, but I want to see if there's anything you'd like to add from a Blend perspective on how COVID changed the technology roadmap for eMortgages, sans the pandemic.
I think COVID definitely, increased or pushed the need or brought that, use of eMortgage faster with all the partners in the ecosystem, like lenders, settlement agents, and everyone. And I think it's really important, because when you think about, and Shane Hartzler earlier mentioning about eNote initially was, okay, you only think about eNote when it comes to RON, but eNote can be used for every type of closing. Yeah, there could be certain times when you cannot do a RON, but you can always do eNote all the time. And I think that's kind of, I would say, thinking that or stuff that lenders are getting more comfortable with, because they are learning more about digital closing. Initially, it was all new for them. It was one of the projects that they were focusing on, but with regulations changing, the support from all the partners, from our GSEs, from settlement agents, from the underwriters on that side, it's making it much easier to fast forward that roadmap. Because when everybody on the partners side is thinking about collectively, it just makes it easier. So we applied the same approach, when we were building the product. It's not just about thinking borrower and customers and lender, but a settlement agent is critical, because if you are not going to enable them into this digital mortgage system and the digital closing, they will find it very difficult to see, how do I participate in? And simple example is, they are supposed to receive closing documents. They're supposed to collaborate. And again, Shane mentioned earlier, why collaboration is so critical, because it's not just about the final closing package that we talk about that a settlement agent receive. It's everything that happens before that. You're trying to balance these CDs and you're sharing the documents back and forth with the lender. If we can provide them in a seamless, one simple platform where they can do all documentation, sharing of information through a single click, and for all types of lenders, because a settlement agent works with different lenders. Then they're going to say, okay, this is truly what makes my life easier, because the more friction you will introduce, the difficult it will be for the settlement agents and other parties to come onto the platform. So that's, I felt was important for us, and that's what we at Blend has done. And I just want to share one of the feedback that we got from a title agent, last week only, and they were raving to the lenders about how easy to use system is. We have not put any kind of videos or we're not doing any trainings to the settlement agent. They just get an email with a link to sign on and they use it. And they found it's very intuitive, easier to use. They know exactly what they have to do, what is the action they have to take on. So that's how I believe is going to make it easier for fast tracking the eMortgages and the digital closing when you build the right product with the right customer experience for every partner in the ecosystem.
Oh, Rob, you make some great points there, and completely agree with you on the eNote side as well, that it doesn't have to be strictly to a RON or digital transaction. There is so much power that can be leveraged from having that electronic note on record, even from a security standpoint. And to your point too about the intuitiveness of a platform, I think it's so important as far as creating that level of adoption, whether it's for on the lender side or with the settlement agent. Naturally there's some skittishness to adopting new technology from what tried and true practices that professionals in our industry are accustomed to using. And so the simpler, to your point, that we can make it through these innovations, the easier it is to get everybody on board with the process. So, on that note, I want to pivot back to Shane Westra here, talking about, really ease of use. And I think Simplenexuss does a great job at this with the single sign-on capability with your point of sale platform. Shane, I'd love your opinion on what elements of Simplenexuss's point of sale platform can provide a better borrower experience?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Really, and you touched on it already, with the single sign-on, we believe that the borrower just needs, one set of credentials and one interface for the whole process. So I think with eMortgage, a lot of this technology has actually been around for quite some time, but it's been a bolt-on experience. And so they went through the whole process, the borrower would go through it, and then suddenly comes time to closing, and they're kind of ripped into this different world. And that just doesn't fly anymore. This needs to be completely seamless from beginning to end, no additional credentials, the same look and feel and interface, and just make it a task-based workflow. Because that's essentially what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to lead them down. Okay, here's the next thing you need to do. Here's the next thing you need to do. And each task unlocks the next one. So when it comes to closing, it's no big surprise. It's just kind of the next natural thing. Oh, what do I need to, schedule an appointment, click here. And that's kind of the perspective from the borrower, which is of course very critical and probably the most critical for success, but very similar for the other personas as well. And as Gaurav mentioned, the settlement agents are a huge part of that. And how do they have a seamless experience as well? We've got 5,000 settlement agents using the platform, and we didn't want to put that burden on the lender to try to train them either. We were starting a very interesting balance between who chooses these platforms for closing. How much influence does the lender have versus the title companies, and for both of them, what impact does that have to the borrower? And so definitely just making sure that it is a great experience for everyone involved, in particular the borrower and borrowers. One thing that we forget to mention, sometimes we just think it's one individual, but how do you deal with co-borrowers or multiple borrower pairs, and make sure that all of those situations are handled in a very elegant fashion. And the other thing for us too is really focusing on the how, because not all borrowers are the same. How do you deal with people that are more comfortable with a web interface? What about mobile? One of the things that we've put a lot of emphasis on is the mobile interface, having the native mobile apps. And so you get a push notification. So when you take a picture of something, it's not stored on your device. Again, it's ease of use, but also security, right? So how do you give those options to the borrowers? because not all borrowers are the same, and you need to make sure that you handle all those different scenarios for all the different walks of life that are out there.
No, Shane, that's a great point, because as we get back to a more purchase-centric marketplace, lenders are going to be looking more creatively than ever to find a way to get deals done. And that's going to come with more complicated scenarios. And you need to have a platform that can handle, a co-borrower or a guarantor type scenario, and it'd be as seamless as if it was, a single applicant. So I appreciate you making that point. It's definitely worth mentioning. And then, Gaurav, I want to position the same question back to you. And I'll mention too, just I've heard a lot of feedback, and particularly over the last 6 months from lenders within the collaborative that are clients of Blend, how impressed they've been just with the enhancement that Blend's made to improve the borrower experience and make it more seamless. So I want to provide this question back out to you. From your standpoint, where do you see Blend's point of sale platform, the elements of it being able to provide that enhanced borrower experience?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think the borrower experience is really, really important. I mentioned to you earlier on that. That's like the front and center for us, because if we can create the right experience for the borrowers, it's going to greatly benefit the lenders, because borrowers goes back to the lenders. They really enjoy taking the mortgage and going through the whole process. It's a win-win for everybody. And when we think about a Blend POS system, borrowers are using it for applying for the application. They are receiving the approvals. They're doing all the follow-ups, kind of thing. And they're also signing the disclosures. So when we rolled on this closing over there, it just became a natural step for them. It's not like a lender had to tell borrower that now you're going to see a closing that's come here. They were like, okay, I got a chance to review my closing documents. This is so amazing, because otherwise I'm only seeing the documents at the table when I'm signing the documents. So giving that flexibility and to do it at your own time was really amazing when you think about a single POS system. And one thing that what we realized was, because it's a one single POS where they're able to do all the activities, there is some documents when you think about a closing that can be signed before you go and meet the notary, because not every document is a witness document. And we realized that in the case when the borrowers were receiving that, the chances of borrowers signing all the documents well before they reach the notary, or before a lender has to ask them, can you complete it because your closing is due, is much, much higher, because throughout the application process, they have been used to these follow-ups or tasks that they got accustomed to, that yes, when I get this thing, I can complete it. And there's no friction, because they don't have to create a new user ID, new password. They're used to seeing in the email how the task appear, and just made it much, much easier for borrower to have the right experience. The other thing that we saw that during our lending, when you're applying for the loan, the flexibility and the ability to, have a co-pilot session with the LOs where you can actually understand what is the part of the application. You can work with them, ask questions, and show them what you're going through. A similar kind of capability on the closing side is hugely beneficial, because think about a 40, 50 documents closing package. You might have questions. And if you have an ability to get those questions resolved or answered before you meet the notary, huge, huge benefit for the borrowers. So these are the things that I believe, and we believe at Blend, that the POS platform, the way we have designed, is helping borrowers not only at the application, but also when it comes to closing side.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, guys, I want to round out our discussion today by providing some good advice from each of your perspectives that could be imparted upon lenders when they're thinking about the borrower experience as it is today, and as it will be in the future. So Shane Hartzler, I want to bring you back in here. I'd love your first take at, kind of final messages or advice that you'd impart upon lenders listening in for the experience today and as we look out beyond 21.
Yeah. So when I think about borrower experience, and I think particularly as I look out to the future, and Shane from Simplenexuss sort of mentioned this, but the thing that I think about is how do we continue to sort of build in the phone and think about mobile as it relates to closing, and by that I think it's going to require us as an industry to rethink a lot of how we do that today, right? Like I can't just take a 5-page PDF, disclosure and shrink it down to like 4-point font and expect that somebody's going to really be able to understand that. And so I think we need to rethink the disclosure or what we're trying to do with the disclosure, right? Like the disclosure in some cases is, educating the borrower or making sure that they understand a process or making sure that, so are there ways that I can leverage video or other things that we can do? So I think that's the first thing. I think we need to think about how we continue to integrate the security protocols that are within the phone and leverage those as we think about some of that, and use that for the security protocols. And then the last thing is, and we touched on this earlier, but going with the mobile technology really means that I'm going to be able to close from anywhere. So I'm not tied down, even more so that, the capabilities that Ron gives us today is I can close from, my bedroom at 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday or a Saturday or a Sunday, right? And so we need to be thinking about what that means, but it's going to be even more so when I start going to a phone where I'm going to be doing that anytime, any place. How do we verify that the connection is good? Like there's a lot of implications for that. So those are the things. That's what, like when I think about the borrower experience, I'm really thinking about how do we continue to think about integrating the technology that borrowers already have in place and really make it part of a natural part of how they do business with us.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, between, the mobile phone as well as the video components that are out there in today's technology, it's a core opportunity to meet the borrower of today and tomorrow where they're at and on the devices and the mediums that they're accustomed to using. So, Gaurav, I want to pose the same question back out to you. Any final and parting advice that you would have for lenders listening in as they're focusing on current and future state of the borrower experience?
Yeah, Tom, and I'm gonna, continue the thought that Shane started. When you think about digital closings, now borrower is starting to see the documents much more in advance, as they were seeing, earlier. And when they start seeing the documents, how can we really enable them to understand what is in this document? So that guided document review, some of the, help on what exactly is in this 5-page document. What should I really be focused on? Things that you sit down with sometime your LOs or your lawyer to ask, okay, what should I be focused on? Okay, if these things are right, then yes, I am doing the right mortgage. So not only think a document as like a paper PDF converted into a digital PDF, but what else information can we provide? So that's really critical for us to enable and provide the tools. And we can easily do that in a digital way. So the borrowers are more empowered to understand what they are doing and what they're signing. The second aspect is around the mobile. As Shane mentioned, this is not just a COVID-19 solution that we did, but the true thing is now with this power, you can actually sign the closings anywhere. You don't have to take a day off to sign the closing, or you and your co-borrower could be in different cities on that day to do it, or you could be traveling. And helping the borrowers to do that in all forms of devices is really, really critical. And that's why one of the fundamental things that we need to start understanding for the closing is what documents do really need to be signed on the day of closing with notary versus what can be signed in advance. Because as you start distributing the task and you start aligning them, you actually are giving more flexibility to the borrowers and creating a much better experience where they can do it at a different point of time at their own flexibility. And it also reduces the strain or the pressure that comes on the last day, where now you only have to focus on maybe 5 or 6 witness documents. Like we talked about eNote. Yeah, maybe you can sign the eNote early and just put it in the vault. Even if you're meeting a notary on hybrid for final documents to be signed, but at least your eNote is done. I think that's the kind of experience we need to start thinking about. because we didn't have this flexibility on a traditional closing. You cannot say, sign 4 documents today, sign 6, but on a digital, you can really do that. And I think that's the power of the digital closing, that we can bring it to the borrowers to convert the right experience.
Oh, I love it. Great feedback. And Shane Wester, I want to bring you back in to get your take on imparting advice you'd have for mortgage lenders listening in on the borrower experience of today and tomorrow.
Completely agree with everything that's been said so far from Gaurav and Shane. Such an exciting time with all these enabling factors. One piece of advice that I would have as well is don't forget about the human element. Technology is not a panacea. These are things that will help provide efficiencies and things like that. But at the end of the day, that's what the loan officer can provide, is that guidance and that assistance. And so technology should enable that and take that even further. Gaurav mentioned Copilot. We kind of took that same concept and extended it. How can you have like a chat experience between the borrower, the loan officer, and your real estate partner and the settlement agent to coordinate with closing and just make sure you're on the same page, and allowing mechanisms to always be there to answer questions any time or day, not only for the loan application process, but throughout the entire process of the loan. And so I think a lot of people get scared of technology and think that it's going to replace people, but no, this is going to enhance what people do and let people focus on what really is more important. It's the meaningful human interactions and the relationships. This is a very relationship-focused industry, and we want the technology to aid and assist in that. And so really that's what we're trying to accomplish here, is a true joyful experience through the tech and through the human element as well.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's such an important point to make, that there's this underlying fear out there for certain professionals within the industry that the technology evolution that both Blend and Simplenexuss are making is designed to middle out the human component on the originator side. And to your point, it's quite the opposite, really, to enhance those communications and transparency and expedite the processing and sharing of information to make this a more seamless process than it is today. So fantastic insights. I'm going to turn it back to Shane Hartzler. If there's anything that we didn't hit on, or any final piece of imparting advice that you want to share out as we wrap up today's discussion, as well as this 3-part eMortgage podcast series.
So all I'm going to say, I don't know that I have any, sort of pithy sort of wisdom here at the end. I just want to say I really enjoyed this opportunity. I love listening to what Shane and Gaurav are doing. Again, I believe that these are sort of the future direction of where we're going. I think, as lenders, the technology is going to enable lenders to own much more of that closing experience, and not necessarily, you have everything through mortgage, and then you go to closing and you sort of hand it off to somebody else. And I think through these processes and through these technologies, it's going to enable you to be able to have much more of a seat in terms of what that final borrower experience looks like. And I love what Shane said about the human element, because I do think that really is still sort of a critical piece of this. And what we've found from some of our own research is making sure that you're giving the borrower the chance to interact with you as a lender, however that may be, right? So if I want to interact with you in sort of a have you there with me, I can do that. If I want to be able to interact just through the technology and do everything myself, I can do that, right? But having those options, I think, are really critical to be able to meet people where they are. So really thought those were excellent points.
For our audience listening in, I want to encourage you, any questions that you have, or you want to have a one-on-one consultation, highly recommend getting with Shane and the eMortgage team at Fannie Mae. Can really guide you down your eMortgage roadmap. And as you're getting down that process, if you're not already working with or having discussions with, highly recommend getting in touch with the great folks at both Blend and Simplenexuss as to how they can digitize and continue to innovate your loan manufacturing process. As everybody on the call mentioned, it's really a focus in making this a true end-to-end process as we move forward and leveraging technology. So Shane Hartzler, Shane Westra, Gaurav Nagla, I really appreciate the time, the insights that you shared with us today for the benefit of our members at the Mortgage Collaborative and really the industry as a whole. So I want to thank you all for your insights and your time. Again, I really enjoyed this discussion today.
Thanks, Tom, for hosting.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Yep. Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone.